I want to start my speech by asking you, how many times a day do you want to persuade other people of certain opinion of yours? It might be something as simple as, well, a really nice movie that you want your friends to watch, or you might persuade your parents to let them go to party. Sometimes we want to change people's opinions on more serious matters like politics or religion. As a journalist, my primary job is to form stories in a persuasive way and inform society. Those stories should be fact-checked, they should be evidence-based, and ideally, they should be unbiased. But I didn't start my journey as a journalist. Actually, I come from an economics major and I worked a couple of years in audit. So I'm very used to working with numbers rather than words. But once my friend, she offered me, you know what, I remember you wrote some great articles back at the university, so how about you write a couple of articles for us, the newspaper? And I was like, well, why not? It's a part-time job, and I'll try something new. So when I started to write articles, before you write, as you know, you read a lot because you gather information, you check it out. But because I wasn't a journalist major and I didn't have really experience, I decided to read some articles of my colleagues. And because I write in English, I decided to read the articles of my foreign colleagues. And that's where, for the first time in my life, I realized that when other people write about Kazakhstan or Central Asia, they do have certain perception of our country. And sometimes that perception differs from mine. And that's where I realized that I want to tell my own story. I want to tell stories that I personally experience, and I want to tell stories that people from our country experience themselves, so they add to the general perception. And as my own impact, I think that changing the perception of Kazakhstan, of Central Asia, in politics, in culture, in food, is one of the important parts of my job. Because sometimes, well, media portrays countries as bad as this headline, which doesn't even have the word Kazakhstan in it. It just says Putin's backyard. So, and sometimes I do understand those people because we all come from different backgrounds. And I think it's my job now to write better. I want to show you this book, Orientalism by Edward Said. First, I encountered this author back at university. And one of the concepts he introduced was this division between the West and the East, and that the West had a certain perception of the East, which was mostly inferior. But another important concept he introduced is this concept of otherness, where we perceive world as us, and everything that's outside of us is others. And I want you to pay attention to this concept because I think it's an important thing when we write about who we are, but most importantly, when we write about other people. So, during my career, I asked myself, when I write about basically anything, how do I change that perception? And as I said, I always worked with numbers, worked with facts, but throughout my career, I realized that facts are not always enough. Sometimes it happens that no matter how many factual information you give to people, you can't convince them. Even going back to my childhood and trying to tell my strict parents on why should I go to a sleepover party, I was telling, well, it's safe. There will be 3 of us will be picked up, and all those facts, and my mom was still like, no. She didn't listen to me, and she sounded very unreasonable to me. And sometimes we write articles and or we deliver some facts, but people don't listen to those, and we might seem that they're unreasonable. But my question is, how do we deliver to those unreasonable people? Because that's not really true. It's just they're different, and they have different backgrounds, and they come from different society. They lived in a different society. And I think, I realized that facts are not all we have, because opinions are formed with emotion, and they're not always based on facts. So how do we write to deliver to people? And I think one of the tools I want to highlight is empathy. Is empathy towards our audience, towards our readers. It means walking in their shoes, trying to know what it's like to live like them, to be like them. Just a minute ago, remember I told you about this concept of other. And sometimes as we get more educated, as we learn things, as we think we are real great critical thinkers, we put ourselves in a superior position. And when we try to convince someone through writing or through speaking, we speak from above. And what it does, it actually creates a barrier. It creates a wall between me as a speaker or me as a writer and the audience that I want to deliver. And I asked myself, do I really want to be always right, or do I really want to help people? Let me give you an example to make myself clear. So these are some of the headlines. Back in the 2019, when the world was suffering from COVID, there was this huge debate on media, on social media. There were people who were vaccinating, and there were people who were against those vaccines. And as a journalist, I know that the evidence for vaccines is there. The researchers, the doctors were telling us. But why people were not listening? One of the reasons is that, well, I find sometimes these kind of articles. Let me read one of them. Prospects of a coronavirus vaccine unites anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, and hippie moms. This headline puts certain groups of people, and it presents the situation as if, well, those are really not so smart, not so reasonable people. But if for some reason you were against vaccines and you came up with this headline, you read this headline, would you like to continue reading? Probably not. Or the second one, these vaccine skeptics. You see, this language is important because when we as journalists, or anybody who writes, when we put ourselves in a certain position and we want to deliver the message, I think it's not our job to judge people. It's our job to help them understand. And how do we do that? We do that by trying to learn what makes that person think the other way, and how can I reach out to him and convince him in his language, in his way, without having this superiority complex or feeling that, well, you should better educate yourself. And I think empathy in this is very important. So, another thing, speak to one, address many. What I mean by that is, Again, going back to my background as an economist, when I first started writing, I thought, well, big numbers, convincing numbers are really enough to deliver any kind of story. And when my editor said, well, you should try writing human stories, I said, well, human stories are based on one or two individuals, and they're not really representative of the whole situation. That's not really my style. Oh, boy, was I wrong. Because I realized that, well, let me just give you an example. We all know that last year Turkey and Syria suffered from devastating earthquakes. And living in Kazakhstan, I felt really sad reading the headlines that were numbering the number of victims. So I think it started around 20,000 people, and then we read that it's 30,000, and I think it reached around 50,000 dead people. And of course you feel sad, but at some point I think we're all human, and those numbers just become numbers. And so it did for me. Unless I read one human story article, and it talked about women who lost her son, his wife, and their little child. And when I read the story, I remembered my brother who's married and who lives with his wife and his daughter in Almaty. And that story had such a huge impact on me because for some reason I could relate to it. No, it's not that I could relate. Of course, it's not as if I lost someone, but I really understood what one person can feel when something bad happens. And then I multiplied that feeling to 50,000. I multiplied it by 50,000 times. And it made just completely different effects. Those numbers, 50,000, they suddenly spoke to me completely in a different way. And that was only through one human story. So when we approach writing, I want you to remember that it's not always about numbers and facts, and we should remember what we want to deliver to the people. And one last thing I wanted to mention is, let me tell you a little bit of a backstory. I come from a generation where studying at school, I didn't have internet. And, well, actually, internet was, of course, introduced earlier, but in my family, it came when I was in, I think, 9th grade. And that completely, I remember that how it completely transformed the way we study, because before that, if we had an essay to write, I had to go to a library. And now, suddenly, all my classmates were having real fun just browsing through internet, copying some, I don't know, essays and articles and submitting it to school teachers. And back at the time, teachers didn't know how to deal with that. The plagiarism and intellectual property rights were not really on top priority for them. But it really changed the way we wrote. We wrote essays, we wrote our articles, because suddenly we had a huge exposure to information, and we didn't have to go out of our homes. Why I told you that is because I think now you are experiencing similar trends because of the introduction of artificial intelligence. And actually, the journalism is among the professions that can be, well, some predict that it can be totally substituted by AI. So we can go extinct as a professional species. But I don't really feel threatened. Why? Because of the reasons I gave you earlier, of the human components of every story. And that might be sometimes the most important component. So when you graduate, when you study, you're gonna write, you're gonna want to change someone's perspective about you, about your country, about your profession. And you would use writing tools to do that. So I hope that with empathy, with bringing human stories, with bringing your own stories, you would be able to make the lasting impact. Thank you.